He slammed both hands on the boardroom table, looked a room full of suits dead in the eyes and said, "She's not your property, and neither is her decision." Dead silence. 23 floors up in one of the most powerful corporate buildings in New York City, a widowed single father from a small town in Virginia had just blown up a billion-dollar deal. Nobody in that room knew his name 48 hours ago. Now they would never forget it. But here's what none of them knew. The most dangerous thing in that room wasn't the lawyers, the money, or the power. It was a man with nothing left to lose. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You don't want to miss what happens next. The rain came down like it had a grudge, not the soft kind that taps politely on your window at night. This was the kind of rain that meant something heavy sideways, the kind that turns country roads into rivers and knocks the power out for 3 days straight. Calvin Dwyer didn't care. He had the wipers going as fast as they'd go. Both hands locked on the steering wheel of his old '09 Ford pickup, jaw-tight eyes narrowed against the sheets of water hammering the windshield. It was 11:14 at night. He had a 7-year-old at home being watched by his neighbor Mrs. Patterson, a sweet 72-year-old woman who fell asleep before 9 and left a note on the kitchen table that always said the same thing. "I tried to wait up. Leftovers in the fridge. Good night, Calvin." He was coming back from his second job. $16 an hour doing overnight inventory at the lumberyard outside of Harlan, Virginia. He'd worked the day shift at the post office from 7 to 3, picked up Lily from school at 3:15, made dinner, read her 2 chapters of Charlotte's Web, her current obsession, and then driven 40 minutes to start his second shift at 9. This was Tuesday. He did this 4 nights a week. It had been 3 years since Denise died. He didn't talk about that much. Not to Mrs. Patterson. Not to his brother down in Richmond. Not to Lily. Not in any real way that opened the wound back up. He talked around it the way you drive around a pothole you've memorized. You know it's there. You adjust. You keep moving. Grief doesn't care how busy you are. Calvin had learned that the hard way. So he just stayed busy enough that grief couldn't find a place to sit down. The radio was off. He liked the quiet when it was just him and the road. That was when he saw the hazard lights. Faint at first blinking orange through the curtain of rain. Pulled far to the right, almost into the ditch. A car expensive even at this distance, even in this weather. Something long and dark, low to the ground. He slowed without thinking about it the way his father had always taught him. If somebody's stuck on the road at night, Calvin, you stop. That's just what you do. He pulled up behind the vehicle, left his headlights on so they both had some visibility, grabbed the flashlight from the glove box, and stepped out into the downpour. He was soaked in 4 seconds. It was a black Mercedes. Late model, maybe a year old. Both rear tires had slid into the soft gravel shoulder and sunk. There was a thin crack running up the passenger side window, not a crash, more like road debris. The hazard lights pulsed steadily. Calvin knocked on the driver's window. Nothing. He knocked again louder. "Hey, you okay in there?" The window came down 2 inches. He angled the flashlight low, not wanting to blind whoever was inside. What he saw stopped him cold. A woman. Somewhere in her mid-30s, maybe. Dark hair plastered to her face. Eyes sharp, almost defiant even in that condition. She was wearing what looked like a blazer that probably cost more than his truck. Her makeup was ruined by the rain that had gotten through the cracked window, but she held herself in a way that said she was not accustomed to asking for help. "Ever. My phone is dead," she said flatly, not panicked, not particularly grateful, like she was reporting a minor inconvenience to an assistant. "Both tires are down. I don't know where the nearest gas station is." "About 12 miles back," Calvin said. "You're not going to walk it?" Obviously. He almost laughed. He didn't, but he almost did. "You have somebody I can call got a charger in my truck." There was a pause. Her jaw tightened slightly, and she looked straight ahead through the rain-streaked windshield. "There's no one," she said. 3 words. Simple. But he heard something in them that he recognized down to his bones. He cleared his throat. "All right. Let me get my cables. Might be able to. I'm in a wheelchair, she said suddenly. Flat. Like she was reading a disclaimer. Like she said it before he could say something that would embarrass one of them. If you're going to offer me a ride, I want you to know that up front. I don't need you to treat me differently. I just need you to know. Calvin looked at her for a moment. Okay, he said. Just that. Okay. He went to the truck bed, pulled out the folding chair he kept back there for job sites, and set it in the gravel next to the passenger door. Then he came around, opened the door all the way, and stepped back. Tell me what you need, he said. Something shifted in her expression. Something small and fast that she locked back down almost immediately. Like a door opening and closing so quickly you weren't sure you'd seen it. There's a chair in the back seat, she said carefully. Her wheelchair was folded and strapped against the back passenger seat. He got it out, unfolded, it locked the wheels, and set it flush against the car door. She moved from the car seat into the chair with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing it for years. No hesitation, no help requested, no dramatic moment made of it. He walked beside her through the rain to the truck. Getting the chair in took a minute. The truck cab wasn't built for it, but they worked it out quietly, practically without ceremony. He helped her up into the passenger seat. She gripped the door frame. He steadied the chair. They made it work. He got in on the driver's side, soaked through rain dripping off the brim of his cap. He turned up the heat. They sat in silence for a moment. Calvin Dwyer, he said, and put the truck in drive. Another pause, longer than felt comfortable, like she was deciding something. Nadia, she said. Just the one name. He noticed. He didn't say anything about it. The drive to his house took 25 minutes in that rain. He offered to take her to the motel on Route 9, but she'd already tried to call it on his charger full. There was a flooding situation 3 towns over, and every room within 40 miles was taken. He called Mrs. Patterson to explain he was running a little late, and the old woman had already been asleep. Her voicemail picked up immediately. When he pulled into his driveway, he turned to her. I've got a spare room, he said. It's nothing fancy, but it's dry and there's a lock on the door. You can sleep, and in the morning I'll drive you wherever you need to go. She was looking at his house. It was small. White siding that needed a fresh coat. A porch with one light on. A wind chime Denise had hung up that Calvin could never bring himself to take down. Why? She asked, and it sounded like a genuine question. Not suspicious exactly. More like she was trying to run the math, and the numbers weren't adding up. Because it's raining and you've got nowhere to go, he said simply. And I've got a little girl in there who'd give me grief for the rest of my life if she found out I left somebody stranded. Something happened in Nadia's face again, slower this time, harder to lock down. She nodded once. Thank you, she said. And this time, it didn't sound like a disclaimer. He got her inside, got her set up in the spare room, the one with the yellow walls that still had some of Lily's old finger paintings taped to them from when she used to sleep in here during thunderstorms. He brought her towels, a dry t-shirt, and a pair of sweatpants that had belonged to Denise and had never been worn. He didn't tell her that. He just set them on the chair by the door and said goodnight. He went to bed at midnight. He did not expect to think about her. He thought about her. Not in any complicated way. More like the way you can't stop running over something in your mind because it doesn't quite fit any category you have. She hadn't thanked him the way people thank you. She hadn't been afraid of him. She hadn't performed helplessness. She'd just been present. Like a person who was used to every room paying attention to her and was surprised to find that uncomfortable. He fell asleep thinking about the way she'd said, "There's no one." At 6:45 in the morning, his alarm went off. He silenced it, lay still for 30 seconds in the way he always did. The 30 seconds where he was still half asleep and Denise was still alive, and the house was full, in a way it hadn't been in 3 years. And then he got up. He smelled coffee. He stood in the doorway of the hall for a moment, certain he'd imagined it. He hadn't. He walked toward the kitchen and stopped in the doorway. Nadia was at the stove. She'd transferred from her chair to the kitchen stool he kept by the counter, and she'd pulled the stool alongside the range, and she was standing, or half-standing, balanced making eggs. She was wearing his shirt. The big blue flannel he kept on the hook by the back door, the one he threw on over everything in the mornings, because the house got cold before the heat kicked in. She'd put it on over Denise's sweatpants, and it swallowed her, and her hair was down and damp, and she looked absolutely nothing like she had the night before in that blazer, with the rain destroying her composure. She looked somehow like she belonged there. And at the kitchen table in her pajamas with the cartoon owls on them was Lily. His daughter was sitting with her legs crossed on the chair, elbows on the table chin, in her hands, watching Nadia cook with the absolute focused attention of a child completely captivated. "You're doing it wrong," Lily said gravely. "I am absolutely not doing it wrong," Nadia said without looking up. "You have to put the cheese in before you fold it. That's how the cheese melts the right way. The cheese melts fine either way." That's what someone who's never had a properly melted cheese omelet would say. Calvin stood very still in the doorway. He could not remember the last time Lily had talked that much before 7 in the morning. He could not remember the last time the kitchen had felt like that. Nadia glanced up and saw him. For just a second her expression was unguarded. Something close to embarrassed, close to pleased, close to something he didn't have a word for. "She woke me up," Nadia said, in a tone that strongly implied she was not complaining. "She knocked on the door at 6:15 and asked if I liked omelets." "I do like omelets," Lily said seriously. "I see that," Calvin said. He walked in and poured himself a coffee, and for a long moment just stood there, mug in hand, watching his daughter argue cheerfully with a woman in his flannel shirt about the proper technique for folding eggs. It was such a normal thing. He had forgotten how much he missed normal things. He sat down at the table across from Lily. She looked at him with those big, dark eyes of hers, Denise's eyes every time, and she said with great confidence, "She can stay right?" Calvin looked at Nadia. Nadia looked at him over her shoulder. That guarded thing was back, the armor clicking back into place, but it wasn't all the way up. It was like she couldn't quite close it all the way in this kitchen, in that shirt with this child, who had apparently decided in the span of 15 minutes that Nadia was someone worth arguing with about cheese. "I should be going soon," Nadia said carefully. "Where?" Lily asked. A pause. "I have work," Nadia said. "I have people expecting me." "They can wait," Lily said with the calm certainty of a 7-year-old who has never once had to manage a board of directors. And somehow inexplicably against every instinct that Nadia Sinclair Voss, CEO of Voss Capital Group, the youngest woman ever to take a company public on the NYSE, a woman who had not let anyone see her cry since she was 19 years old, against every single one of those instincts she stayed. She told herself it was just for breakfast. She told herself it was just until the roads cleared. She told herself a lot of things that morning. None of them were entirely true. But the omelet was perfect, even if she did put the cheese in at the wrong time. The storm had passed. The roads cleared by noon. Nadia did not leave. And in the quiet of that small house, in the strange peace of a life she had never imagined wanting, something began to break open in her, something that all her money, all her power, and all her carefully constructed armor had never once been able to touch. She told herself she'd understand it eventually. She was wrong about that too. She stayed 3 days. That was what she told herself on the second morning when Lily knocked on her door again at 6:20 with a very serious expression and a proposition involving pancakes. 3 days. She had a board meeting on Friday that her assistant Roland was already losing his mind over. She had 14 unanswered emails from her legal team. She had a public appearance scheduled in Manhattan on Saturday, a charity gala that her PR firm had booked 8 months in advance and had reminded her about 47 times. She had a life, a real one, a large, important, complicated life that was currently waiting for her like a car left running in a parking garage. 3 days, she told herself. Then she made pancakes with a 7-year-old who narrated every single step out loud like she was hosting a cooking show. "Now we add the vanilla," Lily announced, holding up the small brown bottle with both hands. "This is the secret ingredient." "Vanilla is in every pancake recipe," Nadia said. "It's not a secret. It's a secret if you say it like it is." Lily poured it in carefully, tongue between her teeth. "My mom used to say that. She said the difference between regular food and magic food is just whether you believe in what you're making." Nadia went very still for a moment. She kept her eyes on the bowl. "Your mom sounds like she was smart," she said quietly. "She was the smartest," Lily said. And then, without missing a beat, without any of the heaviness that adults always brought to that topic, "Do you know how to make the little bubbles? That's how you know when to flip. You have to wait for the bubbles." Nadia exhaled slowly. "Yeah," she said. "I know about the bubbles." Calvin came in from the back porch, where he'd been on a call with his supervisor about switching a shift, and he stopped in the kitchen doorway, the same way he had the morning before, quiet, observant, that steady look he had, like a man who had learned a long time ago that some moments you don't interrupt. "Bubbles," Lily said authoritatively, pointing at the pan. "I see them," he said. He poured his coffee and sat down, and for a few minutes the only sounds were the soft hiss of the pan and Lily giving a detailed account of why the second pancake was always better than the first one, a theory she had clearly developed over years of personal research. Nadia didn't look at Calvin, but she was aware of him the way you're aware of a fire in a room. Not dangerously, just warmly, presently. She didn't like that. She flipped the pancake. It was perfect. She liked that even less. On the second afternoon, while Lily was at school and Calvin was on his post office shift, Nadia sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open and her phone plugged in and tried to remember who she was. Roland had sent 11 messages since yesterday. Her CFO had sent 3. Her attorney 2. Her former fiancé, a man named Prescott Wells, whose family had been merging empires with hers since before either of them was born, had sent one message that simply read, "We need to talk. This is not optional." She stared at that last one for a long time. Prescott wasn't cruel. She'd always been clear-eyed about that. He wasn't a villain in the traditional sense. He was just a man who had never once looked at her and seen a person instead of a portfolio. Their engagement had been announced 18 months ago, at a function neither of them had particularly wanted to attend, and it had been framed by their families, by the press, by everyone except the 2 people it actually involved as an inevitability. 2 dynasties, 1 merger. Clean lines, clean optics, clean everything. She had said yes because she didn't have a reason strong enough to say no. She had convinced herself that was close enough to wanting it. She closed the message without responding. She opened her presentation for Friday instead. She stared at it for 45 minutes. She didn't write a single word. What she did instead, what she would never admit to anyone, not Roland, not her attorney, not the board, was, look around that kitchen. At the finger painting Lily had done that was stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a pineapple. At the coffee mug on the counter with the chipped handle that Calvin clearly used every single day despite the chip. At the wind chime on the back porch that moved whenever a breeze came through glass and copper, and something wooden all clicking softly together. She thought about the last place she had lived. Her apartment in Manhattan was 42 floors up, designed by an architect who had been on the cover of 3 magazines, and it had cost more per square foot than most people earned in a year. It was stunning. It was cold. She had lived there for 4 years, and she had never once put a finger painting on the refrigerator. She had never once owned a coffee mug with a chip in it. She closed the laptop. She put her head down on the table for exactly 60 seconds she counted, and then she sat back up, straightened her spine, the way she'd been doing since she was 19 years old, in a boardroom full of men twice her age, and she called Roland. "Tell me everything's fine," she said. "Everything is extremely not fine," Roland said. He sounded like a man who had not slept. "Nadia, you have been unreachable for 31 hours. Prescott's team has been calling my phone every 4 hours. The board is, move the Friday meeting to Monday." Silence. Roland. They're not going to like that. They'll survive it. Nadia the Hartwell merger is not going anywhere, she said. The deal doesn't close until the 15th. We have time. Move the meeting. Another silence, longer this time. Are you okay? Roland asked. Quieter now. He'd been with her for 6 years. He knew her well enough to know that tone. She looked at the pineapple magnet on the refrigerator. I'm fine, she said. I'll be in contact. Don't tell Prescott where I am. I don't know where you are. Good, she said. Keep it that way. She hung up and stared at the refrigerator for another long moment. Then she opened her laptop back up. She wrote 11 pages of presentation material in 2 hours. She had always worked best when she was pretending not to care about something. Calvin got home at 4:15. He came in through the back, dropped his keys on the counter, checked the mail he'd grabbed from the box on his way in. Lily wasn't home yet. Mrs. Patterson picked her up on the days Calvin worked the late end of his post office shift. Nadia was still at the kitchen table. She'd moved to the corner of it, made space for him automatically without quite realizing she'd done it. He noticed. He didn't comment on it. He sorted through the mail bill something from the school, a catalog nobody had asked for. And then he looked at her laptop screen, not reading it, just clocking that she was working. You eat anything today? He asked. Coffee. That's not food. I'm aware of the definition of food. He opened the refrigerator, looked at it for a moment, and pulled out things with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd been cooking for 3 years without any help. How do you feel about soup? I feel neutral about soup. Neutral's enough. He set a pot on the stove. What are you working on? She hesitated, not because it was a strange question, because nobody actually asked her that. They asked her what needed to happen, what the numbers looked like, what the board wanted, what Prescott's family expected. Nobody asked what she was working on like it was something she chose. Presentation for my company's board, she said. We're in the middle of a merger. Big one. How big? $1 billion range. He nodded once, unsurprised, like she'd said she was putting together a grocery order. That's stressful. She looked at him. It's the biggest deal of my career, she said. That doesn't answer whether it's stressful. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at the laptop. Yes, she said. It is. Because of the money or because of something else? She turned and looked at him more directly now, because that was a sharper question than she'd expected from a man standing at her stove making soup. What makes you think there's something else? Calvin stirred the pot, not looking at her. Because when people talk about money stress, they get tight around the eyes. You don't look like money stress. You look like... He paused, choosing words carefully. You look like someone who built something they're not sure they want anymore. The kitchen was very quiet. The wind chime on the porch moved. You don't know anything about me, she said. But it came out softer than she intended. No, he agreed. I don't. He served the soup. He set a bowl in front of her without ceremony, put a spoon next to it, sat down across from her with his own bowl, and that was that. She ate. It was the best soup she'd had in years, and she was almost certain it was just canned tomato with some additions. She didn't say this out loud. She ate the whole bowl and looked at the pineapple magnet and tried very hard not to think about what Calvin had just said. She was still thinking about it when Lily came home 20 minutes later and launched immediately into a full report about her day with the energy of someone who had been holding it in for hours, directed roughly equally at both of them. Nadia found herself responding without thinking about it. She found herself asking follow-up questions. She found herself laughing, actually laughing at something Lily said about her teacher's reaction to a science experiment that had gone sideways. When she caught herself laughing, she felt something strange happen in her chest. Not happiness exactly. Or not just happiness, something older than that. Something she'd put away so long ago that she'd almost forgotten its shape. That night she lay in the yellow room with Lily's old finger paintings on the walls and stared at the ceiling and made herself think clearly. She was Nadia Voss. She had built something from scratch. Not entirely from scratch, she was honest enough with herself to acknowledge the inherited advantages. But she had taken what she was given and multiplied it by a factor that nobody had predicted. She had done it while learning to live in a wheelchair at 29, which was the year a black ice incident on a ski slope had changed the coordinates of her life permanently. She had done it while fending off every board member who had ever wondered privately if her disability made her less capable. She had done it while agreeing to an engagement she hadn't chosen to a man she didn't love, because the alternative disappointing the people who needed her to be a certain kind of woman had felt impossible. She had done it alone. She had been proud of doing it alone. She lay there in the dark and thought about the way Calvin had said that doesn't answer whether it's stressful, and the way Lily had talked about her mother's theory of magic food, and the way this small house felt inhabited in a way her 42-floor apartment had never once managed. She thought about Prescott's message. This is not optional. She thought about the merger, the board, the gala on Saturday. She thought about the chipped coffee mug. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum and felt her own heartbeat and said out loud to nobody in a voice barely above a whisper, "What are you doing?" No answer came, but she knew in the way you know things, when you're too tired to pretend you don't, that something was already happening to her in this house. Something quiet and unglamorous and completely outside her control. And for a woman who had spent 16 years constructing a life entirely around maintaining control, that was the most terrifying thing she had felt in a very long time. She stayed a third day, then a fourth. She told Roland she needed more time. He stopped arguing after the second call, not because he'd accepted it, but because he'd heard something in her voice he'd never heard before and wasn't sure what to do with it. She watched Calvin come and go from his 2 jobs without complaint, without performance, without asking anyone to notice how hard he worked. She watched him parent Lily with a patience and a steadiness that made her think about her own father, a man who had been present and absent simultaneously her entire childhood, always there in the house, never quite in the room. She watched Lily heal around her. She didn't fully understand that last part yet. She just knew that when she and Lily sat together on the back porch in the afternoons, Lily reading Nadia, working both of them quiet, in a way that felt easy rather than empty. Something in the child's posture was different than it had been on the first day. Less careful. Less like a girl bracing for something. On the 4th evening, Calvin came home to find Nadia on the floor. Not fallen. Not in distress. Lily had asked her to help build a fort from couch cushions and blankets, and Nadia had maneuvered herself out of her chair and onto the carpet, and was currently engaged in a very serious structural debate about load-bearing blanket corners. Calvin stood in the doorway for a long moment. Nadia looked up, and their eyes met. She expected something sympathy, or that particular careful look people got when they saw her doing something physical that wasn't what they expected. Pity dressed up in a smile. Calvin looked at the fort. "That roof is going to collapse," he said. "It is not," Lily said fiercely. "You've got no interior support. You need another cushion in the middle." "He's right," Nadia said, before she could stop herself. Lily looked at her with profound betrayal. "Structural integrity is not a matter of opinion," Nadia said solemnly. Calvin sat down on the carpet on the other side of the fort, reached over, repositioned a cushion, and the whole thing held. Lily disappeared inside it immediately and declared herself the queen of the fort. Calvin and Nadia sat on opposite sides of it. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "You're still here," he said quietly, not accusatory, just observing. "I'm still here," she agreed. He nodded slowly. He looked at the blanket fort where Lily was making small satisfied sounds and rearranging the interior with great authority. "You don't have to explain it," he said. She looked at him. "I'm not going to ask you questions you're not ready to answer," he said. "You can just be here, while you're here." She stared at him for a long moment. In 16 years of public life, not one person had ever said anything like that to her. Not one person had ever given her permission to simply exist in a room without performance, without purpose, without the weight of being Nadia Voss. The CEO, the figure, the symbol, the woman who'd overcome this and built that and proved them all wrong. Just you can be here. She felt her throat tighten. She looked away before he could see it. Thank you, she said. The same two words from the first night, but they meant something entirely different now. She could feel the difference in her own chest. Inside the fort, Lily had begun singing something small and tuneless to herself. And Nadia Voss, for the first time in longer than she could accurately remember, sat on a carpet in a small house in Virginia and let herself be still. She wasn't happy yet, but she was close to something, closer than she'd been in years. And somewhere underneath all her armor, in the quiet place where she kept the things she didn't let herself want, she felt the first thin fracture of a wall she had built when she was 19 years old and hadn't touched since. She didn't know yet what was on the other side, but for the first time, she wasn't sure she wanted to stop it from opening. She had been there 9 days when the world found her. It didn't announce itself. It never did. That was the thing about the life Nadia had built. It didn't knock. It didn't wait. It arrived the way a storm arrives when you've stopped watching the sky, and by the time you feel the first drop, it's already too late to get inside. She was on the back porch with her laptop when the black SUV turned onto Calvin Street. She knew what it was before it stopped. She recognized the plates Voss Capital's car service, the ones Roland called when he needed something delivered that couldn't wait for email. And behind it, a second car. Darker, older. Prescott's family used those. She closed her laptop. She sat very still for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said quietly to herself, "All right." It was the voice she used before walking into a room she didn't want to enter. The voice she'd developed at 22 in her first major board meeting, surrounded by men who had already decided she wouldn't last 6 months. Flat. Steady. The voice of a woman reminding herself who she was. She wheeled herself to the front of the house. Calvin was in the driveway. He'd been washing his truck. It was a Saturday. Lily was at a birthday party for a girl from her class, and he stood there with the hose in his hand, watching 2 men in suits get out of the first car and a third man get out of the second. The third man was Prescott Wells. He was tall, good-looking, in the way that money manufactured everything, well-fitted, well-maintained, expensively assembled. He had the kind of ease that came from never once having to wonder whether the room would accept him. He saw Nadia first. Then he looked at Calvin. Then back at Nadia. 9 days, Prescott said. Not a greeting, a statement of record. Prescott, her voice was even. Roland said you needed time. He glanced at Calvin again, something moving through his expression that he controlled quickly. I didn't realize time meant this. This, Nadia said, is a home. I suggest you remember that before you say whatever you came here to say. Calvin had set down the hose. He hadn't moved toward anyone or away from anyone. He just stood there the way he always stood, settled, unhurried, completely present. Nadia had come to understand in 9 days that Calvin Dwyer was not a man who could be made to feel small by the entrance of people who thought they were large. One of the suits stepped forward. Ms. Voss, we need to discuss the merger timeline. The Hartwell board has requested confirmation of the engagement announcement by end of week. Without it, the deal... I heard you, she said. The deal is worth. I know what the deal is worth, she said. I built it. I know every number in it. I don't need you to recite it to me in someone else's driveway. Prescott took a step closer. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, something almost human in it. Nadia, come home. Whatever this is, whatever you needed to figure out, you've had your time. We have responsibilities. You have responsibilities, she said. I have a life. They're the same thing. They're not, she said. They were never the same thing. You just needed them to be. Something tightened around Prescott's eyes. You're going to throw away everything we built over... He stopped himself. Looked at Calvin again, longer this time. Over this. Calvin said nothing. Nadia looked at Prescott with the same clarity she brought to earnings reports and litigation strategy. Over the first real thing I've felt in 6 years. Yes, she said, without hesitation. The word landed in the driveway like something dropped from a height. Prescott stared at her. For a moment, something cracked in his composed surface. Not anger, not exactly. More like a man who had never once had to reckon with wanting something and not getting it, and wasn't sure what the feeling was called. "The board will not accept this," he said. "The board works for me," she said. "Not the other way around." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he straightened his jacket, looked at Calvin one more time with an expression that said everything he wasn't going to say out loud, and walked back to his car. The suits followed. Both cars pulled away. Calvin picked up the hose. "Sorry about that," Nadia said. "You don't have to apologize," he said. "They came to your home, and you handled it." He turned the hose back on, went back to the wheel. Well, he'd been working on. Matter-of-fact, unceremonious. Like two men in suits and an ex-fiancée had not just appeared in his driveway and attempted to repossess his houseguest. "You hungry? I was thinking about making lunch." Nadia stared at the back of his head. "Calvin?" "Yeah." "Does anything rattle you?" He turned the hose off, turned around, looked at her with that level, steady gaze. "Plenty of things," he said. "That just wasn't one of them." She looked at him for a long moment. She didn't say what she was thinking, but she felt it, and she was beginning to understand that feeling it and doing nothing about it was no longer something she was willing to accept. That night after dinner, after Lily was in bed, Calvin and Nadia sat on the back porch the way they'd started doing in the evenings, coffee for him, tea for her, the wind chime doing its quiet work in the dark. It had become a ritual without either of them deciding it was one. That was the thing about the last 9 days, nothing had been decided. Things had just become true. "You called him the first real thing you'd felt in 6 years, Calvin said. She looked at her tea. "I heard you," he said. "I wasn't trying to listen. The window was open." "I know," she said. Silence. "That was the year of my accident," she said. 6 years ago. I was 29. After that, I put everything into the company. I told myself that was a choice, that it was what I wanted." She turned the mug in her hands. "I'm very good at telling myself things." "What kind of things?" "That I don't need what I actually need." She said it simply, no performance in it. That the deal matters more than the person. That being the most capable woman in the room is the same as being happy. Calvin was quiet for a moment. "Is it?" "No." She almost laughed. "Obviously not, but it's easier to measure." He nodded. He understood that. She could tell he understood it. "Denise used to say I worked too much," he said. It was the first time he'd offered something about her unprompted. "I thought she was wrong. I thought providing was the same as being present." His jaw shifted slightly. "I got 3 years of perspective on that theory." She looked at him. "I was present," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I was there. I came home every night. I did the things a husband does. I was a good man in all the ways you could measure." He paused. But she was right. There's a difference between being in the room and being in the moment. I understood that about 6 months after she was gone, and there's no fixing it. You just carry that. Nadia said nothing. She had the sense that he didn't say this to many people. She had the sense that he was saying it to her specifically for a reason that neither of them had named yet, but that both of them could feel. "I'm not," she started. "I know you're not staying," he said, not unkindly. "I know who you are now. I put your name in Google on day 3. She blinked. "You waited 3 days. Seemed polite." She let out a short laugh that surprised them both. "I wasn't going to say I'm not staying," she said quieter. "I was going to say I'm not easy. I want to be honest with you about that." She looked at the yard, the dark beyond the porch light. "My life is complicated in ways that it would reach into yours. It already has. Those men today, that was nothing. That was the preview." "I've had a complicated life," he said. "Complicated doesn't scare me." "Calvin." "Nadia." She turned to look at him fully. "I don't know how to do this," she said. Whatever this is, I'm good at many things. I'm genuinely exceptional at several of them. This—" She gestured between them with one hand helplessly. "I have no idea what I'm doing." He looked at her with that expression she'd come to know, steady, unhurried, like a man with enough stillness inside him that other people could borrow from it. "Neither do I," he said. "Doesn't mean it's not worth doing." She held his gaze. The wind chime moved, and she felt that wall in her chest, the one she'd felt cracking on the carpet next to the blanket, fort shift another inch. It was Lily who changed everything. 3 days later, a Tuesday, Nadia was packed. She'd told Roland she'd be back in the city by Thursday. She'd rebooked her flights, rescheduled the gala appearance, sent a careful and deliberately vague email to the board that said exactly enough and nothing more. She had sat with the reality of leaving and told herself it was right, that it was clean, that Calvin deserved a simple life, the kind she was congenitally incapable of providing. She had almost convinced herself. She was zipping the last section of her bag when she heard the knock. Not Calvin's knock. Lily's 3 quick light taps, the kind that said she was trying to be polite but couldn't quite contain the urgency underneath. "Come in," Nadia said. Lily came in carrying something. A small envelope, cream-colored, sealed. Lily held it with both hands and a gravity that she usually reserved for serious fort construction decisions. She set it on the bed next to Nadia's bag. "I wasn't supposed to give this to anyone," Lily said. "Dad put it in his special box, the one on the shelf in his room that he doesn't talk about." She looked at the envelope, then at Nadia, then back at the envelope. "But I think she would have wanted you to have it." Nadia looked at the envelope. "Lily," she said carefully, "does your dad know?" "No," Lily said. "But I think he'll be okay with it." She looked up with those dark eyes that were so exactly like Calvin's, it sometimes made Nadia's chest ache. She wrote a lot of letters before she got sick. She said she wanted to leave words behind. In case. A pause. This one was for if somebody came who needed it. Nadia picked up the envelope. Her hands were completely steady. She was proud of her hands. "You can read it later," Lily said. "When I'm not here. I don't want to see what it says. It feels like it's for you." She moved to the door, then stopped without turning around. "I don't want you to go," she said. Quiet and clean and without manipulation. Just the truth. Then she left. Nadia sat on the bed with the envelope for a long time. She didn't open it right away. She sat with it in her hands and thought about a woman she'd never met. A woman who had loved Calvin Dwyer and raised Lily Dwyer and died 3 years ago, and still somehow reached across that distance to do one more thing for someone she'd never know. She opened the envelope. The handwriting was careful, a little unsteady but deliberate. Someone who had taken their time. To whoever this finds, I don't know who you are. I don't know what you look like or where you came from or why you needed this. But I know this house. I know the people in it. And if you've gotten far enough that Lily decided you needed these words, then you already matter more than you might realize. I know my husband. He is the kind of man who will build a wall around his heart to protect you from the inconvenience of his grief. He'll call it practicality. He'll tell himself he's protecting you. He won't realize he's also protecting himself from everything that scares him. Tell him I said to stop that. And if you're the one building the wall, if you're the one who came here with your complicated life and your careful armor and your very good reasons for leaving, I want you to know something I learned too late. The most dangerous thing is not loving someone who might leave. The most dangerous thing is leaving before you find out what you could have been together. I built this house into a home by staying, not by being fearless, by being terrified and staying anyway. Don't close the door on this because of me. There is more than enough room. Nadia read it twice. Then she pressed it flat against her chest with both hands, closed her eyes, and felt something happen in her face that she had not allowed in 6 years. She cried. Not the controlled kind. Not the private, manageable 2 minutes in the bathroom kind she'd permitted herself on the worst nights after the accident. This was the other kind. the kind that comes up from somewhere below language, below decision, below all the architecture you've spent years constructing specifically to prevent it. She sat on the bed in the yellow room with Lily's finger paintings on the walls, and she let it happen. She cried for the accident. She cried for the engagement she'd agreed to out of exhaustion. She cried for 6 years of empty apartments and full boardrooms and performance masquerading as living. She cried for a woman named Denise she would never meet, who had loved the same man she was falling in love with, and who had somehow impossibly given her permission anyway. She cried until there was nothing left to cry. Then she sat very still, and she was, for the first time in longer than she could account for, completely quiet inside. She found Calvin in the kitchen in the morning, early, before Lily was up. The gray light of 6 a.m. coming through the window, the coffee maker running, Calvin standing at the counter in the same way he always stood, steady, unhurried, not expecting anything. He looked up when she came in. He saw her face. He didn't say anything about what he saw there. He just waited. She set the letter on the counter between them. He looked at it. His jaw worked once. He looked up at her. "Lily," he said quietly, not angry, just knowing. "She thought I needed it," Nadia said. She was right. Calvin looked at the letter for a long moment. She watched something move through him, grief and love and memory, and something else she didn't have a name for, all of it crossing his face in the space of a few seconds before he got it back under control. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't—" "Don't apologize for her," Nadia said. He stopped. She moved closer. She stopped when she was close enough that she had to look up at him. She was still in her chair, and he was standing, and she had never once in her adult life liked being in a position where she had to look up, but this was different. This felt like a choice. "Calvin," she said. "Yeah." The coffee maker beeped. Neither of them moved. She took a breath. "Marry me," she said. He stared at her. "I know how that sounds," she said. "I know it's fast, and I know my life is a disaster, and I know you have 100 reasons to say no, and I know, Nadia. I'm asking anyway because your wife was right, and I'm terrified, and I'm going to leave this house in the next 20 minutes if you say nothing, and I will spend the next 10 years building another wall I can't—" "Nadia." She stopped. He crouched down so they were eye level. He looked at her, the way she'd come to understand. He looked at things he considered important, fully, carefully, without looking away. "Ask me again," he said. Slower. She looked at him. Something in her chest cracked open the rest of the way. "Marry me," she said. Slow. Quiet. Certain. The silence lasted exactly long enough for her heart to break and reassemble. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." She laughed, a short, stunned, completely undignified sound. He put his hand over hers on the armrest of her chair. And in the kitchen, where everything had started, the eggs and the pancakes and the soup and the blanket fort, and all 9 days of becoming something neither of them had planned. Nadia Voss let herself be held. Not rescued, not managed. Just held. The coffee was getting cold. Neither of them cared. The news broke on a Thursday. Not because anyone announced it, not because Nadia held a press conference or Calvin called a reporter. It broke the way things always break in the age of phones and strangers. Someone saw something, someone took a picture, someone posted it, and by the time either of them knew it was happening, it had already happened. The picture was from the previous Saturday. Calvin and Nadia on the front porch. He was handing her a coffee mug, the chipped one, and she was laughing at something, head tilted back, completely unguarded, in a way that Nadia Voss had never once been photographed before. Lily was visible in the background, sitting on the porch steps with a book. Whoever took it had been across the street with a long lens. The caption read, "CEO Nadia Voss hides out with mystery man while billion-dollar merger hangs in the balance." By noon, it had 40,000 shares. By evening, the number had 6 zeros. Roland called at 6:15. "I need you to see what's happening online," he said without greeting. "I've seen it," she said. "Nadia." I've seen it, Roland. A pause. The Hartwell board is convening an emergency call tomorrow morning. Prescott's PR team has already put out a statement. They're implying that you had a breakdown. That the stress of the merger caused, they can imply whatever they want. There are pieces going up. Some of them are saying he's after your money. That he... Roland's voice got careful in the way it got when he was about to say something he knew she wasn't going to like. There are pieces using very specific language about him, Nadia. The kind of language that... I know exactly what kind of language, she said. Her voice was flat and cold in a way that Roland recognized, and most people never got to hear. Save everything, every article, every post, every statement Prescott's team releases. I want documentation of all of it. What are you going to do? What I do, she said. Handle it. She hung up and sat in the quiet of the kitchen for a moment. Then she called for Calvin. He came in from the back porch where he'd been on his own phone. His brother from Richmond had called. Then Mrs. Patterson. Then 2 people from the post office who'd seen his face attached to a headline. He came in and looked at her, and his jaw was set in a way she hadn't seen before. "Tell me," she said. "It's fine," he said. "Calvin." He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. He put his phone face down on the table. "My brother called. He'd seen some of the articles. He stopped, started again. "The ones that have opinions about why a man like me would be interested in a woman like you." She held his gaze. "A man like me," he repeated. Quiet, letting her hear what was underneath that. "I know," she said. "I've dealt with that my whole life," he said. "I'm not surprised. I want to be clear about that. I'm not surprised and I'm not broken up about it. What I am..." He looked at the phone, then back at her. "What I am is angry that Lily is going to see it. She's 7. I don't know how to explain to a 7-year-old why people who don't know her father are saying things like that." Nadia was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Yeah. I have been in rooms my entire career where people looked at me and made a decision before I opened my mouth. Because of how I looked, because of the chair, because I was the youngest person there and the only woman and whatever else they needed me to be to justify not taking me seriously." She leaned forward slightly. "Every single time the only thing that worked, the only thing that ever actually worked was not defending myself. It was making them irrelevant." He looked at her. "I'm not going to issue a statement explaining you," she said. "I'm not going to ask you to defend yourself or perform respectability for people who've already decided. I'm going to do what I always do." Her voice was steady, almost gentle, but the thing underneath it was iron. "I'm going to make them irrelevant." He was quiet for a moment. "How?" She allowed herself a small, precise smile. "I'm going to walk into that board meeting tomorrow, and I'm going to take the Hartwell merger off the table. Not because of you. Not because of any of this. Because it was the wrong deal for reasons I already knew and was too tired to fight. And then I'm going to face that room and say exactly what I think in front of every camera they try to put in front of me." Calvin looked at her for a long time. "That's going to cost you." "Yes," she said. "It is." "Nadia, the merger is not worth what it costs," she said. And she said it in the voice of someone who had finally finished a calculation they'd been avoiding for months. "I spent 6 years building things that looked like success and felt like nothing. I am not spending the next 6 doing the same thing." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. "I told you, I don't know how to do this, but I know how to stop doing the things that are wrong. I've always been better at that." He turned his hand over and held hers. "You don't have to blow up your company for me," he said. "I'm not blowing up my company," she said. "I'm redirecting it. There's a difference." A beat. "Also, I'm a little bit blowing up the merger." The corner of his mouth moved. "There it is," she said. "I'm not smiling." "You're almost smiling." "I'm concerned," he said, concernedly. She laughed, and he did too, and for a few seconds, it was just that, Just two people laughing in a kitchen at 10 o'clock at night, while the world outside made noise about them. Then Lily appeared in the doorway in her owl pajamas, squinting at the light. "Why is everyone laughing?" she demanded. "It's late." "Go back to bed," Calvin said. "I heard my name on the TV at Mrs. Patterson's today," Lily said. She did not move. "She changed the channel really fast, but I heard it. Somebody said my dad's name." Calvin and Nadia looked at each other. Calvin got up and went to Lily. He crouched down in front of her. "Hey, look at me." She looked at him. "Some people who don't know us are talking about us," he said. "Because Nadia is someone a lot of people know, and when something happens in her life, people talk about it. Does that make sense?" "Are they saying bad things?" Lily asked. "Some of them," he said. "Yeah." Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "Are the bad things true?" "No," he said. She nodded once. "Then why do you care what they say?" Calvin looked at her. Then he looked at Nadia over his shoulder. Nadia spread her hands slightly, as if to say the child has a point. "You're right," Calvin said. "Go to bed." Lily went, but she stopped in the hallway and said without turning around, "Nadia." "Yeah. Don't let them make you leave." Then she was gone. The hallway was empty, and the house was quiet, and the words sat in the kitchen between them like something solid. Calvin stood up slowly. He stayed facing the hallway for a moment. When he turned back around, his face had that look, the one where the stillness was working hard. "She's something else," Nadia said quietly. "She gets it from her mother," he said. "She gets some of it from you." He sat back down, picked up his coffee, found it cold, set it back down. "What time is the board meeting?" 8 a.m. "In the city. There's a conference facility 20 minutes from here. Roland arranged it when I told him I wasn't coming back to Manhattan yet." "Yet?" he said. "I live there," she said. "I can't pretend that's not true." She looked at him carefully. "I'm not going to pretend any of the logistical reality isn't what it is. My company is in New York. Your life is here. Lily's school is here." She paused. "These are problems we'd have to solve." "I've solved problems before," he said. "These are specific kinds of problems. Nadia." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "When Denise got sick, I don't talk about this much, so I'm going to ask you to just listen. When she got sick, the doctors gave us numbers, probabilities, time frames, and every single one of them was right." He looked at his hands. "I sat with her through every one of them being right, and I kept thinking, okay, this is the thing that breaks me. This is the one I can't carry. And I carried every single one." He looked up. "I'm not saying that to impress you. I'm saying it because I need you to understand that I don't scare easy. And the problems you're describing, distance logistics schedules, public attention." He shook his head. "Those are just geography and calendars." She stared at him. "You are," she said, "the most frustratingly calm person I have ever met." "I know. I need you to understand that in my world, that is extremely unusual." "I gathered. I'm surrounded by people who perform very loudly." "I noticed, yeah. 2 of them showed up in my driveway." She pressed her lips together. "I'm trying to tell you that I don't entirely trust this. I want to trust it. I don't have a lot of practice trusting things that feel good." He looked at her steadily. "I know that too," he said. "I'm not asking you to trust it all at once. I'm asking you to not run from it." She was quiet. "There's a difference," he said. She thought about Denise's letter. "Don't close the door on this because of me. There is more than enough room." "Okay," she said. "Just that." "Okay." He nodded. He picked up the cold coffee, looked at it, put it down again. "I'll drive you to the meeting tomorrow." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he said. "I want to." She looked at him for a moment. "Roland will have opinions about that." "Roland can ride in the back," Calvin said. She laughed again. It happened easier now, the laughing. Less like something that surprised her, and more like something that had been there all along, waiting to be allowed. The board meeting was everything she'd expected and nothing she'd been afraid of. 14 people around a conference table, lawyers on two sides. Roland standing in the corner with his tablet and an expression of a man diffusing something with unclear wiring. Hartwell's representatives on a video call from Chicago. Prescott was not in the room, but his family's legal team was, and they sat together at the far end of the table like a weather system. Nadia wheeled to the head of the table. She did not open with pleasantries. "I'm withdrawing from the Hartwell merger," she said. "Effective today. The reasons are in the documentation Roland is distributing. The legal pathway is clean, and I've already spoken with our counsel." The room erupted. She let it go for 45 seconds. She had learned over years that there was a moment in every room when people needed to exhaust themselves before they could listen, and then she put one hand flat on the table and said simply, "I'm done." Silence. "I want to address something that is not in the documentation," she continued, "because it will come up anyway, and I prefer to control the framing." She looked around the table, deliberately making eye contact with each face. "There have been public statements suggesting that my recent decisions are the result of emotional compromise or diminished judgment. Those statements are coming from people who have a financial interest in making them and zero factual basis for making them." She paused. "My judgment is not compromised. My values have been clarified. Those are not the same thing." Prescott's lawyer, a thin man named Carver, who had been in the business of making problems disappear for 30 years, leaned forward. "Ms. Voss, with respect, the board has concerns about the circumstances under which the board serves the company," Nadia said. "The company is not a merger vehicle for other people's family interests. It never was." She looked at him directly. "And if the board has specific concerns about my fitness to lead, I invite them to bring those concerns through the appropriate governance channels. I'll see them there." Carver sat back. One of Nadia's own board members, a woman named Patricia Osei, who'd been in her corner since the beginning, 20 years in finance, no one's pawn, caught Nadia's eye across the table and gave the smallest possible nod. The meeting lasted another 90 minutes. By the end of it, the merger was dead. 3 members of Prescott's legal team had left, and Roland had consumed what appeared to be an entire bottle of antacids. She came out to the parking lot and found Calvin leaning against his truck, hands in his pockets, exactly where she'd left him. "How'd it go?" he asked. "The merger is done," she said. "Prescott's people will make noise for a while. It'll fade." "You sure about that?" "I've been making noise irrelevant since I was 22, she said. "I'm very good at it." He opened the truck door. Then, from behind them, Nadia. She turned. Prescott was there. He must have been waiting. He hadn't been in the meeting, but he'd known she'd come out this way, which meant he'd planned this, which was both predictable and sad. He looked tired. Not the performed exhaustion of a man making a point. Actually tired. Like something had run down in him overnight. "You didn't have to do it this way," he said. "Prescott. In public. You could have called me." "I tried," she said quietly. "For about 2 years I tried to have a conversation with you that wasn't about the company or the deal or the announcement. You were never interested." He looked at her, then at Calvin, then back at her. "Is this really what you want? This life with—" He stopped himself this time before finishing it. Whatever he'd been about to say, he swallowed it. Maybe there was something left in him worth respecting after all. "Yes," she said. "It really is." He stood there for another moment. The parking lot was quiet. His jaw worked once. "I hope it's worth it," he said, and he walked away. She watched him go. Calvin said nothing. He didn't ask what she was feeling or whether she was okay. He just stood there next to her, present, steady, the same as always. After a moment, she turned back to the truck. "Take me home," she said. He got in the driver's side. She settled into the passenger seat, the familiar smell of the cab, The chip in the coffee mug he kept in the cup holder, the small photograph of Lily that was stuck to the dash with a piece of tape that had been there so long it had yellowed at the edges. He started the engine. "Lily's going to want to know what happened," he said. "Tell her the fort held," Nadia said. He glanced at her. "She'll understand," Nadia said. He pulled out of the lot. Outside, the world was still making noise. The articles were still being written. The opinions were still being formed. The people who needed her story to mean something simple and cynical were still working on their versions of it. None of it reached her in this truck. None of it was louder than the sound of the road and the wind chime she was somehow already thinking of as home. She leaned her head back against the seat. She had walked into that room and held the line, and it had cost exactly what she'd known it would cost. And she would deal with the remainder of that cost over the coming weeks. And it would be hard and manageable and worth it. She was certain about worth it. She had not been certain about anything personal in 6 years. The certainty felt extraordinary. It felt, she thought, like the first real thing she'd built. Not the biggest thing, not the most valuable thing in any currency anyone had ever tried to quantify for her, but the first real one. She closed her eyes. Calvin drove, and outside the windows of an old Ford pickup truck on a road that led back to a small house with a wind chime and a chipped coffee mug, and a 7-year-old who had decided a stranger was family before anyone had thought to ask permission, the world kept going. For the first time in a long time, Nadia Voss was glad to be in it. The months that followed were not easy. Nadia had never pretended they would be. Easy was not a word she'd used to describe her life since she was 29 years old, and she wasn't about to start now. What she had instead, what she was learning to recognize as something better than easy, was real. And real, she was discovering, had a weight to it that easy never did. Real had friction and texture, and the occasional morning where everything felt impossible, and you got up and did it anyway. She kept her apartment in Manhattan. She was honest with herself and with Calvin about the fact that she needed to. Voss Capital was headquartered there. Her team was there. Her work was there. And dismantling that overnight wouldn't have been strength, it would have been theater. She drove to Virginia on Thursday nights and drove back on Monday mornings. Sometimes Calvin brought Lily to the city on weekends, and Lily walked through Nadia's apartment with the critical eye of a small person taking architectural notes, pronouncing the kitchen too cold, and the windows too large, and the refrigerator insufficiently magneted. Nadia put a finger painting on the refrigerator the second weekend Lily visited. It was a purple horse, with what Lily described as a realistic mane. It stayed there. Roland, who had been with Nadia through the accident and the recovery, and the 18-hour days, and the merger wars and everything in between, came into her office on a Wednesday morning 6 weeks after the board meeting and stood in front of her desk with an expression she'd never seen on him before. "You look different," he said. She looked up from her laptop. "Different how?" "Like a person," he said. She stared at him. "That came out wrong?" he said quickly. "It really did. I mean..." He sat down across from her, which he didn't usually do without being invited. "You look like someone who goes home at night. You look like someone who has a..." He searched for the word. "A life. Outside of this." He gestured at the office, at the view, at the whole carefully constructed architecture of Nadia Voss' professional entity. She thought about the chipped coffee mug, about blanket forts and pancakes and the wind chime clicking in the dark. "I do," she said. Roland nodded slowly. "The Hartwell people have stopped calling," he said. "For whatever that's worth." "It's worth something," she said. "Not as much as it would have 6 months ago." He looked at her for a moment. "You're really doing this," he said. Not a question. More like a man watching a weather pattern he'd been tracking finally resolve into something he could name. "I really am," she said. He nodded, once adjusted his tablet under his arm, and stood up. "Then I'd like to request Fridays off," he said. "If you're not going to be here anyway." She laughed. "Approved," she said. "God, Roland, you should have asked 2 years ago." "You wouldn't have said yes 2 years ago," he said, and he was absolutely right, and they both knew it. The articles didn't stop right away. That was the thing about public narrative. It had its own momentum, its own hunger, and it didn't care particularly about the truth when a cleaner story was available. For a while, the cleaner story was that Nadia Voss had lost her edge, had been manipulated, had made decisions from a compromised emotional state. The subtext in some pieces was ugly and specific and racially coded in ways that made her attorney want to pursue litigation, and made Calvin set his phone face down on the counter and not look at it for a day. She watched him do that once, come in from outside, see a notification, read it, put the phone down with a quiet deliberateness that was more controlled than anger, but made of the same material, and she understood in that moment that she was not the only one paying a price. She had known that intellectually. She understood it differently, watching him stand at his kitchen counter, choosing not to react to something that deserved a reaction. "Calvin," she said. "I'm fine," he said. "You don't have to be fine." He turned around. He looked at her for a moment. "You know what gets me," he said. "Not the stuff about money, not the gold digger angle. I've heard that kind of thing my whole life, and it doesn't—" He shook his head. "It's the ones about Lily. The ones that talk about what this environment is doing to her. As if she was—" His voice didn't break, but it thinned slightly. "As if she was something to rescue. From her own home. From the people who love her." Nadia was quiet. "She's fine," he said. "She's better than fine. She's—" He stopped. "You saw her last week." Nadia had seen her last week. She'd come down Thursday evening to find Lily at the kitchen table, not just with a book, but with 3 books, stacked, annotated in her own 7-year-old way, with sticky notes in different colors, running what she'd described to Nadia, with complete seriousness, as a book club. When Nadia had asked who else was in the book club, Lily had said, "Just me currently, but I'm accepting applications." "She's extraordinary," Nadia said. "Yeah," Calvin said. "She is." He picked his phone back up, put it in his pocket. He looked at Nadia directly. "I want you to know that I don't want you to ever feel like any of this is your fault. The attention, the articles. I made a choice. We made a choice." "I know," she said. "I don't regret it," he said. "I want to be clear about that, any of it." She wheeled closer to him. She looked up at him the way she'd looked up at him in the kitchen the morning she'd asked him to marry her, choosing it, not enduring it. "I know that too," she said. "And Calvin—" She took a breath. "I need to tell you something I don't think I've said clearly enough." He waited. "I didn't ask you to marry me because I was lonely," she said. "I didn't ask because I was scared of leaving, or because your wife's letter told me to, or because Lily looked at me a certain way, even though all of those things were true." She held his gaze. "I asked because you are the first person I have ever known who looked at my life, the whole thing, the chair, the company, the complicated mess of all of it, and didn't try to fix any of it. You just stood next to it, with me." She paused. "That is rarer than anything I've ever built. And I wanted you to know that I know that." He was very still. "Okay," he said. "That's all you've got." "I'm processing," he said. "Give me a minute." She laughed. He put his hand on her shoulder, the weight of it steady and warm. "I love you," he said, like it was a simple fact, like he'd known it for a while and was only now finding the right moment to say it without it becoming a big production. She put her hand over his. "I love you too," she said. "Obviously." "Obviously," he agreed. "Don't make it weird," she said. "You're the one who made a speech." It was not a speech. It was an articulation of— "It was a speech," he said. "A good one, but a speech." She pressed her lips together to keep from smiling, and failed completely. Patricia Osei called her on a Tuesday in late October. Patricia, who had been on Nadia's board for 6 years and had given that small nod across the conference table the morning of the merger vote, called on a personal line, not a business one. "I want to talk to you about something," Patricia said. "Not Voss Capital Business. Something else." "All right," Nadia said. There's a foundation, Patricia said. Disability advocacy and employment equity. They've been trying to get off the ground for 3 years, and they have the infrastructure, but they don't have the right face, the right voice. A pause. I've been watching what you've done in the past few months. Not the merger, anyone can kill a merger. What you said in that room, the way you said it. Another pause. You have something, Nadia. You've always had it. But before you were using it to build things for shareholders. I want to talk to you about using it for something else. Nadia sat with that for a moment. She thought about the board meeting. About the way she'd said my values have been clarified. About how it had felt to say that in a room full of people who needed her to be a certain kind of woman and to say it anyway. Send me what you have, she said. I will, Patricia said. And then, how's the family? Nadia paused at the word. Family. She thought about Lily's book club, about Calvin's truck and the Thursday drives and the coffee mug and the wind chime, about a purple horse on a refrigerator in a Manhattan apartment 42 floors up. Good, she said. Really good. I'm glad, Patricia said, and she meant it. They got married in February. Not a large wedding. Nadia had been offered large, her PR firm had practically vibrated with the potential of it. The optics, the coverage, the narrative rehabilitation opportunity. And she had said no, with a finality that had ended the conversation permanently. 22 people. Calvin's brother from Richmond, who shook Nadia's hand and said, He talks about you like your weather just a fact of the world now, which made her laugh more than anything had in years. Mrs. Patterson, who cried through the entire ceremony and then ate 3 pieces of cake with the unabashed joy of a woman who had been waiting for this. Roland, who had pressed his suit and stood in the back and pretended 3 separate times not to be emotional. Patricia Osei and her husband. A handful of Calvin's friends from the post office and the lumber yard, men who shook his hand and clapped him on the back and talked to Nadia like a person, not a headline. Lily was the flower girl. She had opinions about this role that she had communicated in writing in a document she'd presented to both Calvin and Nadia at the kitchen table 10 days before the wedding. The document outlined her preferred petal distribution strategy, her position on the appropriateness of the basket she'd been given, and a formal request to also serve as co-officiant. The co-officiant request was denied. The petal distribution strategy was accepted in full. She scattered petals with the focused intensity of someone executing a plan they'd designed themselves, and at one point looked up mid-aisle to find both Calvin and Nadia watching her with expressions she'd catalog later as the best thing she'd ever seen on 2 faces at the same time. The ceremony was short. The reception was long. At some point in the evening, Lily fell asleep on a chair in the corner with her flower girl dress slightly askew, and her shoes somewhere they hadn't been an hour ago, and Calvin draped his jacket over her without interrupting the conversation. He was having the gesture so automatic, it probably didn't register to him as anything. It registered to Nadia. Everything registered to Nadia now. That was the thing about letting your walls down. The bad things got louder too for a while. The grief and the old fears and the familiar loneliness that had been her companion for so long, it had started to feel like personality. All of it was louder for a while, but so was everything else. The laughing was louder. The mornings were louder. The feeling of a hand on her shoulder in a kitchen at 6 a.m. was so loud, sometimes she didn't know what to do with it, except stay very still and feel it. She was learning to stay still. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done. Harder than the accident. Harder than the recovery. Harder than building a company with people who'd spent years waiting for her to fail. Because all of those things had required her to be strong in ways she already knew. This required a different kind of strength. The kind that looked from the outside like nothing at all. The kind that was in fact everything. In April, she took the foundation board position that Patricia had called about. Her first public appearance in that role was a conference in D.C. Employment Equity and Disability Rights. A room of advocates and policymakers and people who had been fighting these fights for decades, without anyone of significant public profile willing to stand next to them. She did not prepare a polished speech. She prepared the truth. She stood at the podium, stood braced against it, the way she'd learned to stand in situations where the chair itself would become the story, and she needed the story to be something else. And she talked about being 29 and waking up in a hospital room and understanding that the world had already decided what her life would look like from that point forward. She talked about spending 6 years proving the world wrong in ways that required her to never once admit that the world had cost her something. She talked about a small house in Virginia and a 7-year-old who hadn't smiled in a year and a chipped coffee mug that had taught her more about abundance than anything she'd ever owned. She did not cry, but she came close enough that 3 people in the front row did it on her behalf. She was in the car on the way back to the hotel when her phone buzzed. Calvin. She picked up. "How'd it go?" he asked. "I think I might have changed some minds," she said. "Yeah." Possibly also cried in front of 200 people, slightly. "Slightly doesn't count," he said. "That is factually incorrect, but I appreciate you saying it." She leaned back against the seat. "How's Lily?" Currently explaining to me why her homework about ecosystems should count as extra credit because she went off curriculum in a direction she describes as more interesting. "She's not wrong," Nadia said. "I know she's not wrong," Calvin said. "I'm not telling her that until she finishes the actual assignment." She heard Lily's voice in the background insistent, making a detailed argument, and Calvin's voice responding with the patient immovability of a man who had learned that engaging with 7-year-old legal theory was a losing proposition and had accepted this. She sat in the back of that car and listened to the two of them argue about ecosystems and extra credit through a phone speaker. And she thought about a night on a deserted road in the rain, when she'd said there's no one with a flatness that had cost her nothing because she'd stopped expecting it to cost her anything. She thought about what it had felt like to mean those words. She thought about what it felt like to not mean them anymore. "Nadia," Calvin said. "You still there?" "I'm here," she said. "Good," he said. Simple, unceremonious, completely certain. "Come home." She looked out the window at the city passing by the lights, and the motion, and the beautiful, indifferent machinery of a world that kept moving, whether you were living in it or just going through it. "I'm on my way," she said. She hung up. She put her phone in her lap and felt the car moving forward, and thought about all the walls she'd built, and the one she'd finally stopped building, and the life on the other side of it that she hadn't known was possible because nobody had told her it existed, and she hadn't thought to look. She had spent 16 years building an empire. She had done it with discipline and intelligence and a ferocity that had never once needed anyone's permission. And it was real. It was hers. She wasn't done with it. She would never be entirely done with it because it was part of who she was, the same way the wheelchair was part of who she was, the same way the accident was part of who she was. Not a limitation, but a coordinate, a point on the map of a life that was larger and stranger and more worth having than she had understood when she was building it. But the greatest thing she had ever made was not a company. It was not a merger or a foundation or a speech in a Washington conference room that made 200 people rethink something. The greatest thing she had ever made was simpler than all of it, and harder than all of it, and was waiting for her in a small house in Virginia, where the wind chime moved in the evening, and a 7-year-old had a book club with a current membership of 1. And a man who had stood beside everything she was, without trying to make it smaller, had said, "Come home," like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because it was. It was the most natural thing in the world. And Nadia Voss, CEO, wife, stepmother, woman, human being, entirely and without apology, was finally completely, unambiguously home.